It's 6 o'clock. Thanks, councillors. I'd like to open tonight's Community and Cultural Committee meeting. I'll start off by reading the advice regarding recording and webcasting of the meeting. This committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting, and audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations, I haven't received any. No. Apologies, we have two. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillor Mack and Councillor King and grant leave of absence to the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Vandervan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Happy to move that the minutes of the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday, 19th of February 2018 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second that motion.
Councillor Vandervan, would you like to speak to those minutes at all?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Matters arising from the minutes, I don't believe we have any this month. That brings us to reports of committees and working parties. Councillor Vandervan.
I'm happy to move that the minutes recommendations of the Sports Albury Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 21 February 2018 at 7 p.m. be received, noted and accepted, noting that I was a late apology for that meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, would you like to speak to those minutes at all?
No, thank you. The work of the Sports Albury Committee continues and a lot of grants that are going to worthy causes. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. We've got Lauren Jackson Sports Centre advisory minutes. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the minutes and recommendations of the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 28th February at 6 p.m. be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to those minutes? Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to officers' reports for consideration. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move that the committee recommends to Council that Council receive and note the contents of the report and endorse the development of a family domestic violence implementation plan in the workplace within 12 months. Thank you. Councillor
Stutchbury.
Happy to second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to that motion?
Just briefly. There obviously were a number of options relating to this particular thing, and we had representations very early on from the White Ribbon Association. But I think after a lot of discussion, debate and the report from our staff, we've come up with a very good solution, and I believe that developing the policy in-house is the best way to go.
Thank you. I have another speaker for Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst I support the concept before us, the motion before us, I do have some concerns about how you actually measure this. We're putting $57,000 over a 3-year period to council. That's the thought. Anyway, what I'm on about is that domestic violence is a hideous situation across the entire community. I know what we can do about it is sometimes we give it out to a contractor and the contractor says, look, I can deliver a program that can fix it, or we can educate people. But at the end of the day, it's got to be the individuals themselves. And whilst I said before, whilst I support this, I have some reservation in how effective it is to some of the men in the community that just will not change their attitudes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. I have no other indication of anyone wishing to speak for and against. So if you'll allow just some comments from the chair. Firstly, to clarify for the record that there were 3 options before us from the staff. One of those options was to seek external white ribbon accreditation, and that had a significant cost associated with it. That's actually not the recommendation of the staff, nor is it the motion that's been moved tonight. What we're moving tonight is for the staff to develop an implementation plan that we'll be able to pick and choose between aspects we need to develop locally and those we don't. It's adapted to our context rather than sticking to the generic white ribbon plan. I personally strongly support what we're doing. It's absolutely critical that we provide the best possible work environment for people that are undergoing this serious problem. It's been under-recognised for a very long time, and just like something like occupational health and safety and having a good payroll system for our staff, this is something that's really important to provide a good environment for them and to be a leading workplace on this issue. So I'm very happy to support the recommendation. There's still no more speakers, so I go back to Councillor Thurley if you'd like to close the debate. I'll now put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. I need a mover for the next item, please, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that this committee recommends to Council that number 1, we support in principle, subject to an agreement from the City of Amsterdam, A, the conservation of the statuette, undertake artistic recreation of the statuette using digital imaging to produce a mould and 2 bronze replica statuettes at an estimated cost of $20,300. B, allocate $20,300 in the 2018-19 budget to undertake the works. 2, seek funding for the conservation work of the existing statuette.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderven.
Happy to second that, Madam Chair.
Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm presently the councillor member of the Ivor Community Memorial Trust, and there's a lot of work to be done there, and this is probably an issue that is somewhat peripheral to that work being the restoration and housing in the Museum of the Aircraft. But we also have the Ivor collection, and this particular statuette, once recreated, would form an important part of the collection. And also there's the opportunity of giving the second copy of it to the Dutch for their museum. I am not an expert in the conservation or restoration or recreation of statuettes, and I'm very happy to take the staff recommendation on this matter that the statuette be recreated in this way. The cost, whilst not insignificant, is a pretty small percentage of our overall annual budget, and the Ivor itself is an important part of Albury's history, and I think that what is proposing to be spent here is quite reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I have a question from Councillor Vanderven.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to relevant staff. They mentioned in the report that the conservation of the object to reduce further deterioration should be a priority, and relevant New South Wales Office of Environment and Heritage funding streams will be investigated. Just wondering what other funding streams they might try to tap into to assist in that conservation, and has the Dutch community in Albury-Wodonga been, is that one of the organisations that might be targeted to help with that funding?
Thank you. I'll put that question through to Mr Jenkins.
To you, Madam Chair. There are other possible funding sources. We have, on occasion in the past, obtained minor grants from the National Library of Australia. and we would certainly explore that option. I wasn't aware of that at the time the report was written. There's also the possibility of approaching the Dutch Embassy, who have small grant schemes as well. We just need to understand whether this is something that would fit with their criteria, but that's certainly something that could be explored as well. I'm also aware, as you've alluded to, that there is people in the community with strong ties to the story and the Dutch community that may have an interest in this, and certainly that's something we can follow up as well.
Thank you, Mr Jenkins. I have another speaker for Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo the words of Councillor Stutchbury. This is an opportunity to achieve further publicity for the story of the Iver, and some of that will rub off, obviously, on the whole issue of the restoration of the plane and its housing and so on. I'd probably like to publicly acknowledge the work of our staff, Mr Jenkins and his staff. This has been a bit of a long saga, the statuette, and also the work of Noel Jackling, who has done a lot of work in this area. I think that the important part of this motion is we support in principle, because we do need to talk to the City of Amsterdam to see where the relevant and appropriate place for this possible statue might be. But in any case, I think this is a worthy motion and should be supported.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. I have no further speakers for or against. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to close debate?
Just briefly, yes, echoing Councillor Thurley, thanks very much to the staff who've worked quite hard on this particular issue over the last 6 to 12 months.
Thank you, councillors. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Officers' reports for noting, we have none. Delegates' reports for noting, I have none. Is there any urgent business, councillors? Looks like we have none, and there's no confidential items tonight, so I'll close the meeting at 6:12 p.m. Thank you.
So I'll declare the Finance Administration Committee meeting open. This committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting, that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Thank you. FAC 2, Conflict of Interest Declaration received by the Chair. I have received one from Mr Finlayson. It's non-pecuniary, and the brief description is, prior to my employment with AlburyCity 4 years ago, I worked with Gavin Cater at Greater Shepparton City Council. Gavin is now an associate of Centium, who is AlburyCity's current contracted internal auditor. Action is declared less than significant conflict of interest. No further action is required due to the effluxion of time. Thank you. FAC 3, apologies. Councillor Vanderveen.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to move that Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillors Mack and King and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
And Councillor Conn.
Happy to second that, Mr Chair.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. All in favour? The contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, thank you, Mr Chair. I move that the minutes of the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday 19th February 2018 at 6:06 p.m. be confirmed.
And Councillor Vanderveen.
Happy to second that, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Chair.
I'll put the motion. All in favour? The contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 5, matters arise from the minutes. I don't have any indication. So I'll move on to FAC 6, reports, minutes of committees and working parties. FAC 6.1, Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I move that the minutes recommendation of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee meeting held on 28th of February 2018 and the chairperson's covering report as attached be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. And Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to second that.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Vanderman? Thank you. I have no indication of questions, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? The contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 7, Officers' Reports for consideration. 7.1 is the Draft Model Code of Meeting Practice. Councillor Comm.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I move that the committee recommends to Council that Council A, receive and note the report, and B, provide a submission supporting the Draft Model Code of Meeting Practice consistent with the information outlined in the report.
Thank you. I need a second. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Conn, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Only just briefly to note that the suggested model code of meeting practice from the Office of Local Government suggests making webcasting mandatory statewide, and I'm very proud that AlburyCity led the way and took that step ourselves.
Thank you. I have no other questions or comments, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? On the contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 7.2, Proposed Councillor Induction and Professional Development Guidelines. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. To move, I'll just get my page to go over the right page, that the committee recommends to Council that Council A, receive and note the report, and B, provide a submission supporting the Councillor Induction and Professional Development Guidelines consistent with the issues identified in this report, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Glacken? I have no questions, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against, the motion is carried. 7.3, Media Policy Review 2018. Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd like to move a slightly different motion to that in the agenda, please. I move that the committee recommends to Council that Council accepts and approves the revised Media Policy 2018 with the following amendment, and that a further review take place in February 2020. That amendment is that the 10th protocol read, councillors are entitled to enter into public debate and make comment on council affairs, provided they clearly state that such public comment reflects their personal opinion and not that of council or a committee of the council. Thank you.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'm very interested to second this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury.
Mr Chair.
I have a question from Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. I'm not certain this really needs to be in the media policy, because if a councillor is speaking on a personal matter of their own mind, I don't see why it needs to be part of the media policy for council, so long as they don't contravene any components within the policy.
Do you want me to clarify?
Mr Chair, if you can go.
Thank you, Councillor Conn.
Thank you.
This is not an addition to the policy. This is an amendment to the policy. This is in the suggested policy from staff and our previous media policy. Almost exactly, I've removed 4 words from that sentence. That this is a very similar statement is in our current media policy.
Mr Chair, can I ask
Yes,
just for a moment to look at that? Thank you.
Yeah. I have another question. I'll take the other question from Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's more a statement that...
No, it's either a question or it's part of the debate, Councillor Doxey.
It's a question.
Thank you.
The relevant member of staff. Thank you, Mr Chair. For example, if you are speaking to the media and they know you're a councillor, they always refer to you as a councillor. It makes little difference whether you are speaking on a personal nature or not. Is that right, Mr Jenkins?
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm probably not the best officer to answer.
I'll ask Mr. Zaknich, would you like to answer this question?
Still in the last meeting, I know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify and to answer your question, dot point 10 of the protocol currently says councillors are entitled to enter into public debate in their private capacity. In their private capacity are the words that Councillor Conn is suggesting that be removed. It has very little effect on that protocol, and again just really reiterates the fact that councillors are entitled to enter into public debate and make comment on council affairs, providing they clearly state that such public comment reflects their personal views and opinion and not that of the council or a committee of the council. So it really continues to be the fact in terms of the guiding principles around council's media policy. With those 4 words removed, it really doesn't change that long-standing requirement in the current policy or the proposed revised policy.
Thank you. I will ask Councillor Conn to open debate. I should have done that sooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, the amendment that I'm proposing is incredibly minor, and it's for 2 reasons. Firstly, as Councillor Doxy's pointed out, it's incredibly difficult to speak to the media or the public in a private capacity when they know you're a councillor. I think that's a difficult distinction to make, and it's actually clumsy wording in our old policy that I was hoping to remove. The second reason I'd like to remove it is because many councillors have other capacities in the community that aren't their private capacity. For example, Councillor Doxy, you might like to speak on behalf of the RSL. We're all parts of various other community groups. And by the inclusion of those 4 words, the policy actually precludes us from speaking on behalf of other community groups we might be involved in if that group has a view on a council issue. As Mr. Zaknich has said, the intent of the wording is very similar to our current policy. I'm just trying to remove what I believe is a clumsily worded clause.
I have a question from Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to the most relevant member of staff, one of the biggest issues, of course, with councillors commenting on council issues in a private capacity is that if there's not some rules and regs around this, once council's made a decision, it is beholden on all councillors to support that decision, even though they personally might have voted against it. I see this particular protocol as providing opportunities for councillors to perhaps make a mockery of that particular requirement. Would Mr. Zaknich like to make comment on that, please?
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. So those provisions don't essentially change, Councillor Vandervan. That protocol remains essentially the same. Councillors can enter into the public debate and make comment on council affairs, provided they clearly state that such public comment reflects their personal opinion. Nowhere, I think, in the policy currently as it stands talks about those issues you've raised, where there's active undermining, where that does exist in the council's code of conduct. So the debate should occur in the council meeting. That's where the debate occurs. Once the decision's made, the protocol, essentially under the code of conduct at least, is to support that decision as a majority decision, and that's a long-standing requirement in the council's adopted code of conduct. Not specifically stated in the media policy, but a reference to the code of conduct obviously aligns with this policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. Just hang on. One of the other issues, of course, is that the media have take great joy in not publishing or recording the words that you say, this is my personal opinion only. And, of course, that does then lead to situations where you might clearly state that your opinion is private, but that there's no way of proving that you've done that unless you've actually taken a recording. So it's just a bit problematical whether you leave the 4 words in or take the 4 words out as the amendment has suggested. So I just see that as a bit of a problem in dealing with the media when they're not upfront. They take if you say, I'm making these comments from a personal perspective only, not as a councillor or as a member of council.
Councillor Donovan, can I suggest you should either raise this as a debating point, but this is not a question.
I'm asking you the question. I was getting to the question, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry it was a little bit a roundabout, but the question is, how do we deal with that situation that we might say it, but there's no proof that we've said it?
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. Well, certainly if it becomes an issue, there's a process to go through where we would determine that in discussions with the media outlet. But again, that practice should continue where, if it is your personal view, the councillor needs to state that, and all the media training we've done reinforces that and continues to do so. Of course, the media doesn't think that's of interest because it's not news. That's why they're not reporting it.
Councillor Stutchby, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if you'd grant me leave to ask the mover of the amendment a question. My question is, Councillor Comm, are you proposing this amendment because of your knowledge of the English language, or because of some personal sort of episode that has occurred to you in relation to this particular clause of the code? I'm just interested in why you want to delete 4 words from it, and therefore have a greater understanding of why I seconded it.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Stutchbury. No, this doesn't relate to any particular incident. There's some public debate statewide regarding council media policies that's come about because of the policies of other councils that aren't ours. And having read a lot of that debate and participated in discussion with councillors from other councils, it made me particularly interested in our media policy. And so rather than moving it as proposed, I read it with a fine-tooth comb and found those 4 words to be problematic.
Could I just follow up with a very brief statement? I don't think removing those 4 words actually alters the meaning of the clause. They're 4 superfluous words. Therefore, on the basis of the English language, I'm happy to have them removed, but on the basis of the meaning of the clause, I don't think it makes any difference.
Councillor Zakin, you have a question?
Yes, if I could clarify, please, why the words would be... thank you, Mr. Chair. Why the words in their private capacity would be problematic, I think, were the words Councillor Comm used. I can't understand that.
That's a question you're putting through to me, Mr. Chair.
Well,
I personally believe that those words are problematic because, as pointed out by Councillor Doxey, we don't really have a private capacity, and when we do speak to media outlets, they do so in the understanding that we're a councillor, and also because we represent a number of other organisations. So without the removal of those 4 words, it would actually be against policy for any of us to speak on behalf of other community groups we might be involved in. And I thought that the intent of the motion, or the intent of that protocol was there with or without the words as pointed at by Councillor Stutchbury, so we might as well not have them.
Mr.
You wish to speak for the motion, Councillor?
No, I wish to foreshadow an alternative motion if this one is lost, and that would be that we would revert to the original motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do you wish to close debate, Councillor Comm?
Look, not really. I think I've had to make my point a few times in a row because of all the questions. This was never intended to be a major change, and I believe the intent of the policy is as it's always been.
From the chair, it seems to me it's just a minor clearing up of some words, which is a minor clarification of policy. And so, okay, I have no other questions or comments, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion is carried. FAC 8, Investment balances, February 2018. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. To move through you that the committee recommends to Council that Council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of February 2018.
Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Councillor Vanderven, you have a question?
I do, Mr Chair. Through the relevant member of staff on page, let me check here, page 22 of the electronic copy, we seem to have reduced our investments by type, non-fossil fuel, quite significantly in the last 8 months. Is there a particular focus or reason for that? It's gone from about 43% to 18%, so nearly a 60% decrease in those investments. So just trying to get an understanding of why that's happened.
Mr Finlays.
Through you, Mr Chair. Further information provided in the report, there was a ratings downgrade of a number of institutions, which included the Bendigo Bank, which has reduced the amount of funds we're able to invest with the Bendigo Bank under AlburyCity's current investment procedure framework. Also, investments held with the Suncorp Bank have reduced, mainly due to the competitiveness of the interest rates they're able to offer currently. And those factors, along with other factors, are intended to be taken into account as part of a review of AlburyCity's investment policy and procedure, which will come before the Finance and Administration Committee in the future.
Just a follow-up, not so much a question, but a statement. I understand that there is a explanation of why the numbers reduced 80%, but not the reason why. Do you understand? It says due to the reduction of holdings of the Bendigo Bank, but there's no explanation of why they were reduced. So
Yes, there was.
Could have.
Can you? I believe there was an explanation, but I'll let Mr Finlayson go through that. Why we reduced our investment with Bendigo?
Well, I understand it. My statement, Mr Chair, is yes, I understand now why it was reduced, but there's nothing in the report that says why we reduced our investment with the Bendigo Bank and Suncorp. But I understand now that they were re-rated with a lower rating, and so we had to have a lesser, we could invest less with them. So that's, I understand that now, but it wasn't in that report. Thank you.
I have no other questions or comments, so I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion is carried. FAC 8.2 State Cover Workers Compensation WHS Audit Report. Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to move the committee recommends to Council and Council A receive and note this report. B, note the AlburyCity results from the State Cover 2016-17 Workers Compensation and WHS report. And C, note the improvement in the State Cover 2017 WHS self-audit results.
Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Councillor Vanderven, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, Mr Chair, obviously this reflects the whole of council approach and embracing of the the work health and safety environment in council. The disappointing thing for me is that it's obviously still very much the case that one individual or two individuals with long-term absences from council because of injury have a significant effect on our premiums. I mean, we're talking, I think, two individuals are going to cost us something like $300,000 in extra premiums, which just seems extraordinary to me on the basis that we've got 470-odd full-time equivalent employees and two of them can cost you $300,000 in premiums. So I find that staggering, but I just wish to compliment management and staff on what they've managed to do as far as our premiums are concerned. Obviously, we've got a bit of a hiccup in the road, but we're still overall in the right direction with nearly a best of state performance as far as all of the indicators are concerned. So well done. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I have no other speakers. I'd like to make some remarks from the chair, and I am not completely comfortable with the notion that 2 or 3 people are costing us $200,000 to $300,000. If you look at our lost time injury frequency rate, it has now risen back to approaching 10. It had got down to a significantly lower number. We've had recent lost time injuries, so it's not as if these are old injuries which are going on and on and on and causing lost time. I have one problem. One paragraph in the report on page 25 says, AlburyCity continues to have a comparatively high number of workers' compensation claims. This is considered to be a positive measure of proactive reporting and management. Well, claims are claims. They are not, in my opinion, a measure of positive reporting. They are a measure of accidents and injuries which have resulted in claims. So I have some problems, and it seems to me that our lost time injury frequency rate is rising. We got it down to a reasonable number late in early 2017, but we seem to have turned around and started to head back up. I note that we get lots of good marks on our management and our systems, but if they don't translate into lower accidents, what are they really worth? So while I compliment the staff on a number of matters, I have serious concerns about our lost time injuries and the frequency at which they occur, and we really do need to look at the underlying causes and see if our policies and our management plans are adequate, because we were getting down to quite a low number, and we've now headed back up, and that will impact on our premiums, I think, very significantly this year. They will rise by over 200,000, I believe, and that is not a good result. So I have no other speakers or questions, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? Yes,
Would I be able to close debate, please?
Sorry. Yes, you can.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I note your comments, but I think we also need to put that in perspective of the report, and that is that we continue to have a high number of very minor claims. So what the policy of council is to notify all incidences, and what happens there, we're finding that there are a lot of minor claims. So if you look at the chart of the average cost of claims, whilst we've got a high number of claims, our average cost of claims is less than 40% of OLG average costs. And so from the perspective of where we sit with this, our policy is to report everything, and that results in a lot of very minor claims. And I think that all of the numbers reflect that. I understand your concern that we're still having a lot of lost time injury claims, but I think that at the end of the day, everything's being reported, and that might be skewing the figures. So that's my only comment in closing debate. Thank you, Mr Chair.
I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion is carried. There are no delegates' reports, no matters of urgent business. I have one confidential matter, so I need a motion. Councillor Glackton.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Move that we move into a confidential item exclusive of press of public on the grounds that the matter relates to advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from production in legal proceedings on the grounds of legal professional privilege in accordance with the Local Government Act, etc.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Thank you. I need to ask whether anyone in the gallery wishes to make a submission relating to this matter. Otherwise, we will move into confidential session to discuss this one. There are no submissions, so I'll put the motion. We move into confidential. Against? Motion's carried. Thank you.